Welcome to Wired to Play, the podcast where early brain science meets real life and where play takes its rightful place at the center of how young children learn. I'm your host, Dr. Christie McPeck, and I'm really glad you're here.
And I'm Jeni Gonzalez. I am so excited to be part of this conversation because if you ever watched a child turn a cardboard box into a spaceship or a stick into a magic wand, you've already seen the power of play in action.
Whether you're a parent, an educator, or someone who simply cares deeply about children and their future, this podcast is for you.
Because play isn't extra.
It's essential. At its heart, I want Wired to Play to be about understanding how children learn from birth to 8. And why especially play is the foundation of that learning, right? We know that, right?
Yeah. So we are going to be connecting early brain science with what actually works for children.
Right, absolutely. We'll explore how play supports cognitive, social, emotional, and physical development, and why it's not something we should outgrow or rush past. One of the things that I think that education does right now is because we keep pushing academics down. And when I say academics, I don't just necessarily mean children learning. I'm talking about the idea, because children learn academics even in a play environment, right?
Correct.
I'm talking about pushing the standards down where we're testing children before they're really developmentally ready to test, that we're doing all these things that aren't developmentally appropriate for them, right?
So that means like when we went to kindergarten, we went and I played. You know, there was home living, there was the blocks, and there was the different centers that were happening, which we're not seeing today happening.
Right.
And now TK. You know, it's not just kindergarten, it's the public TK.
Right, exactly. And we're not understanding, I don't think, education as a whole isn't understanding how play builds brains, right? We have all kinds of brain research showing how play builds brains and creates that great foundation through scaffolding, that great foundation for kids for their later learning. But we're not tapping into that because we've taken play out so much of, you know, even now as little as 3, we're not doing play anymore, right? We're doing more like worksheets and wanting them to write their letters, that kind of thing. We also lose in taking play out, we lose relationship building, right? We lose how kids are connected to each other. And I think that's a real problem. Do you see that at your school?
Oh, yes. What I also see is that play teaches the children to socialize with their peers. So you're seeing now where children are not able to build those interrelationships with each other to problem solve. Right. And now it's more teacher directed at the 3-year-old level. And it's just really sad to see that the teachers themselves don't know how to introduce that play.
Right, exactly. So one of my goals for this podcast is that we really show people what developmentally appropriate learning looks like 0 to 8, right? Because sometimes we forget that early childhood includes kindergarten, 1st grade, 2nd grade, even 3rd grade a little bit, right? Yes. Children are 8 in 3rd grade generally. So we want to show what developmentally appropriate programming looks like in all of those age groups, right? What should we be seeing? How should children be playing? Definitely in the younger years, right? I see preschools all the time that don't even have play equipment anymore. They don't have home living centers. They don't have science centers. They don't have places where kids can do kind of hands-on, sort of active things. And I think that's a real issue, with what's happening. So that's one of the things I'd really like to touch in this.
And I think that we want to be able to have listeners feel that buy-in to really stand. I mean, we've been in childcare for many years.
Right.
And how many times did we get parents coming and saying, all my child does is play. I come in, they're in the block center. And we're like, yeah, but look at what they're learning. Look at the connections and having those aha moments.
Right, exactly. And that's what I think parents and some educators and for sure administrators who set policy, or, politicians who set policy. I think what they don't understand is that children's brains from the beginning of their life are wired to learn through experience.
Yes.
And play is the way we give them those experiences. We don't learn as well if we don't, get to interact with things. If that's what shapes the brain, right? That's what makes those connections that are so important, is that the ability to practice things, to try things out, the experiences, those really, really rich experiences. And if we don't have that, that's a problem, right? Because we need babies to be able to have tummy time and kick their legs and do things. We need 3-year-olds who are building blocks and learning about spatial relationships in a real way, not on a piece of paper where they're trying to draw things they don't yet understand, right?
They're not making those connections.
Right. So we do all of those things so that we give them the ability to form those neural connections that they need, right? Those connections that actually happen in the brain. We see it in the research, and one of the things we'll bring in the next, several podcasts is some of that research that shows what those neural connections, what's happening in the child's brain when they're playing versus when they're sitting and filling out what I always call filling out forms, or watching something on a television or a iPad or, some kind of screen. That's what I think is really important, that joyful engagement where they're really interacting with the world and really testing out their ideas, right?
Yeah. And when you look at it, we are developing the whole child. It's not just one part of the child. And when you have a society that says, these are the worksheets, the child needs to write their name by the age of 2. But they haven't even got the fine motor skill to hold a pencil.
Right.
And
that's an example I use in my classes all the time.
And it's
the
like
pencil thing.
Yes. And you're like, well, they don't know how to use the pencil, so let's go ahead and let's have them play and do these activities. That's going to build the strength. It's going to come naturally.
Exactly.
And be able to really have that information and educate teachers so that they can educate parents. Because parents have more trust in the child's teacher than they do the administrators.
Absolutely.
They have that, and they're like, well, if the teacher says it's true, it must be true.
Right. Well, and I think that's important because we as professionals, we should be helping parents understand that when children are embarking in play or participating in play, they learn a lot of the skills that we think they learn through academics, right? They learn to explore cause and effect. They learn to practice problem solving. They develop language, right?
Yes.
In our centers, we have language-rich environments where they're naming things, right? They learn emotional regulation. They learn when they get mad. What's the word for mad? Or what's the word for sad or whatever, right? And we can do that through play. They get to build social understanding. You touched on that, right? That's super important that they get those things, those opportunities, right?
Yes. And I'm thinking back into our infant room. You have a 3-month-old. Parents come in, they're like, oh, my baby's just going to lay there, going to kick their legs, maybe some tummy time. And you're like, well, no, look at what they're getting.
Right.
They're going to be getting interactions where we're going to be speaking to them, and we're going to be showing our face expressions, and we're going to be making those connections where the baby is now going to know, wait, I know that song, and be able to mimic what we're teaching and be able to go back and say, those are those connections that you haven't even, realized they're happening.
Right. And one of the things that I've really noticed as, I've gone through life with people and my grandkids and all is that we often think in education that play is the break.
Yes.
Right?
Recess.
We get to have recess, or we get to go outside and have outside time. But serious learning happens sitting at a desk with a pencil in your hand or whatever. And we know that's just not really true, right? Serious learning happens all the time in play, all day long. Yeah, you're right. All day long. Everything really a child's exposed to, whether that's actually playing in an environment that's been set up for them, or whether it's walking through the grocery store with their mom and their mom's telling them what fruits it is or whatever, right? All of those things make these neural connections that are we're gonna prove are so important, right? They're so important.
Yeah. Example. At a center yesterday, a little girl was being picked up and says, "Mommy, are you here early because it's not dark outside?" The little girl leaves every day like 6:10. Every day. And the mom looked at her and goes, "No, I'm here at the same time." And she looked outside and she's like, but the sun is still out. And the mom goes, oh, yeah,
The time
now
change.
the time changed.
Yeah.
So that little girl made that connection.
Right.
And the mom had like, wow, how did you notice? Like,
Right.
there, and that's her time. That's her clock.
Yes, right. Because they do notice.
Yes.
They notice everything, right? That's just a really important component of education that I think, one of the things when you and I were talking about doing a podcast and really, exploring the ideas and what we wanted to get across. One of the things that's really, for me, that I'm really passionate about is this idea that we need to understand development. Parents and educators need to understand development. How do we practice developmentally appropriate things, practice, whatever? How do we practice that if we don't understand what's developmentally appropriate? If we're trying to get 4-year-olds to sit quietly around a table and fill out forms, and they're not doing that because they're not developmentally ready, then we're having behavior problems, then we're hollering at them, and we're having social issues, right? Which is a problem.
Yes. And when I spoke with the mom, I said she didn't need a worksheet to see that the time changed.
Exactly.
She saw it, she felt it, she saw you.
Right.
That was the biggest learning she had, and she was happy. And the mom went out and they were talking about, that's right, you haven't noticed because today's your first day back at school.
Right.
We've been at home.
Right.
And I told the mom, that's your aha moment.
Right.
Take that to see. And the little girl was like, oh, okay.
Right.
So it's going to stay, the sun's going to stay out longer.
Right. And that's learning about time, which is an academic skill.
Yes.
Right? I mean, that's exactly what that is. So, I'm having such a great conversation.
Yes.
But let's take a few minutes and have a break, and we'll be right back to talk about some more.
Great.
Enjoying the show and want some more? Follow us at Wired to Play Podcast on Instagram.
Welcome back. Let's continue our conversation.
Okay.
One of the things that I kind of alluded to in our last segment, that we think, educators think that learning has to be serious, right? That if you're not doing serious work, or that if you're in a school that's play-based, that you're not really learning, you're not doing academics. I know that at the school where my grandkids go, they talk a lot. They don't do it so much anymore, but they were talking about, like sort of the play preschool and the academic TK, and the parents want academics for their kids. And what I think that we don't understand is that academics happen in a play environment.
Correct.
Right? They happen in a play environment. When we're doing hands-on exploration, when we have open-ended materials, all of those things build that bottom. In education, we talk about scaffolding all the time. We talk about making that bottom foundation strong, so the next things we put on it are solid, right?
Correct. Yeah.
And so that's one of the things I think play does.
Yes, I agree. I mean, for an example, at my center in Riverside, Kid Street Preschool, we had a teacher who was all about academics and working in a play base. And we kept with her. And at first it was like just sneaking some worksheets because that's what parents want.
Flashcards. I remember she was into flashcards for a while.
And we're like, no, that's not play based. And it took, I would say, many years. To get her to finally have that aha moment. And I think it was when her daughter started public school. And her daughter was exactly, maybe even above a child who went to an academic preschool.
Right, exactly.
And had that like, oh, my child has that experience, or my child is more confident socially. Mm-hmm. She's able to express herself.
Right.
And she was able to come back and say, I'm sorry for giving you so much trouble,
Right.
but, I believe it. And now that I believe it, I understand that having the children play is learning. And now what's my next step? What do I do to challenge and scaffold the next level?
Right. And one of the things that we know from the research, right? So you and I have had that feeling for a long time in our guts. But one of the things we know from the research is that if play's pushed aside too early, it causes children to not be more advanced.
Yes.
Children who don't get to play, they miss a lot of things. And that's a real issue. That's a real problem. And so at all the ages, kids need play, but one of the areas where we really sort of eliminate play is when they go into elementary school. You and I have heard it called real school, right? Oh my gosh, you're getting to start real school, which I've always been insulted by, because I have always felt that I am a real educator in preschool and that I have a real school, right? Yes. But I think where that comes about is this idea of formal. It needs to be more formal. They need to now sit and work through a curriculum and learn, their sight words and the whatever. But one of the things that we miss in that sometimes, I think, in those early elementary years, kindergarten, now TK, kindergarten, first grade, second grade, third grade, we miss that when we do things still with play, kids get collaboration. Yes. They get to have creativity, and they get to have problem solving. And one of the things, unfortunately, that's happening, you and I were talking about it at the break, one of the things that's happening in our society is we're not giving kids opportunities to play like you and I had opportunities to play, right? Well, I remember coming home from school, getting into my play clothes, because you can wear your good school clothes to play, getting into my play clothes and going outside and just playing with my friends, cavorting and deciding what we were going to play, which is collaboration, right? Mm-hmm. Maybe having an argument and figuring it out, problem solving. Yeah. Yes. Now what kids do is they are after school, they have a homework packet. You mentioned a homework packet, or they're rushed off to whatever their activities are. They're going to dance class, or they're going to soccer, which is a play activity. Both of those are play activities, but they're all run by adults. Yes. Right? So the adults are making the rules. The adults do the collaborating and decide. Kids don't get to have that back and forth like we used to have. Yeah. And I think that, again, is showing in studies that children now are not as creative. They're not as able to problem solve and, kind of work through things. We don't even let kids be bored anymore. No. Boredom is a great opportunity to figure things out, right? Yes. Just if you're laying around bored and you go figure out what you want to do next. We don't allow kids that opportunity anymore.
No, we're quick to give them a tablet. Oh, if you're bored here, play here. You can go on your tablet, or you can use my phone. Right. Instead of having a conversation, singing songs with them on the way home. Having our children when they were young and we picked them up from preschool, we would talk about, what did you do today? Right. What did you learn? Right. What did you sing? And start working on that, and be able to, like, oh, that's what you did, and be able to have that as a stepping stone of, communicating with the parents. Right. Now parents come in and they're busy, and their child is yanking on their skirt and like, mom, and be able to turn around and be, oh, yes, I see you. I hear you. Right, exactly.
Well, and we know that's how they learn their first language, right? Yes. We learn, if you think about it, it's really amazing. We learn our whole first language basically by the time we're 5. Yes. We learn all the parts of we learn all the vocabulary, we learn all the grammar, we learn all the syntax, we learn everything about our native language vocabulary by having conversation, by people talking to us. And if we stop doing that with kids because we're sitting them in front of a screen all the time, or we're making them fill out worksheets where nobody's allowed to talk. I heard about this awful thing called silent lunch, where you don't allow kids to talk during lunch because we want them to work through their eating faster. And so they don't allow the kids to talk. And wow. I think that's really sad, because for me, one thing, I'm a talker, right? So I would not enjoy not talking during lunch.
How healthy can that be? Because now you're not even getting time for your body to digest the food.
Right, exactly.
So, there is a game that the children play. It's called, like, Silent Ball. And I'm like, I would never be able to run off that. And I'm like, what is this game? They're like, oh, it's so that the kids can get quiet, and then you're able to toss the ball to the kids. I'm like, well, it seems like you just want your classroom to be quiet.
Like the quiet game. Did you ever play that with your kids in the car? Let's do the quiet game. See who can be quiet the longest, right? Right. That's more of a mom thing than a kid thing.
Instead of having their brains making those connections, or when parents will come in with a complaint and say, my child's using these words and they must have learned it at preschool, but they're like, oh yeah, those are not preschool words. Those are like home words. Right. And so they think that the language is only being heard by their child at school.
Right, exactly. Well, and I think some parents balk at the play thing because they think it's going to be overwhelming or too much for them to do, or, oh my gosh, how am I going to do play? I have to give them the tablet because otherwise they're going to be bored or they're going to be upset or whatever. And I think that one of the things we want to show through this podcast is play doesn't have to be something highfalutin, right? It doesn't have to be you go out and buy all these expensive toys or whatever. Play is really just what you do with your kids, right? It's like I said before, walking through the grocery store, telling them what you see, what the colors are. We used to drive, I had quite a drive home when my kids were little. So we used to, like you said, talk about the things that were on the side of the road. When they got a little bit earlier, we used to play the alphabet game where you found letters on the signs, right? I'm teaching them the alphabet.
Yes.
I'm teaching them to look for the alphabet. I'm teaching them letter recognition, right? Which is a really important check mark when you're learning language in an academic setting. I'm doing that naturally through play, right? And my kids don't know that necessarily. They're learning that, but they are.
Yeah.
So one of the things we want to encourage children, our parents and teachers, is to understand that some of the ordinary things we do with kids are teaching.
Yes.
And that their children are always learning. They're absorbing whatever we're giving them, right?
And making sure that we're asking those open-ended questions so that we're able to say, oh, you're in the block area. That's your most favorite spot. What are you doing? What are you creating? How do we know that that's not the next child that's going to grow up to be the architect that's going to build the most biggest building?
Exactly.
Or, we don't want to stop that. We don't want to not allow that child to be able to grow.
Right.
Asking teachers, how do you play? And they look at me like, they don't know.
Right.
I'm like, how do you forget? Like,
right.
As
Exactly.
adults, how did we forget to play?
Right. Well, I think we also undervalue play.
Yes.
I mean, I think our society undervalues play with the No Child Left Behind Act and what brought us to standard-based education, and we're going to talk about that a lot in another segment down the line. But one of the things that we do now is undervalue play. We don't see, as educators, as parents, we don't see the value of play. That's one of the things that I think you and I really want to get across, is that play is valuable. There's so much that you get in play, and that play-based classrooms at any age, 0 to 8, are not chaotic spots. No. They're not, it's not free play. It's not just about letting the kids have bedlam, right? No, these are intentionally designed places. We think out what we're teaching. You gave the example earlier, and I love it. I use it all the time, the example of fine motor skills, right? When I have a parent of a 2-year-old tell me, you're not teaching my child to write because I'm not sitting them in front of a ditto with a pencil, forcing them to write their name, which is a skill that I don't believe most 2-year-olds are developmentally ready to do.
Correct.
My answer is, of course I'm teaching your child to write. I teach your child to write every day when they play with Play-Doh, when they pick up things with their pincer grasp, right? When they're moving one thing to another place, right? Yeah. I'm teaching your child the bottom scaffold of learning to write, because you can't learn to write until you hold a pencil, right?
Yes.
There's just no way to do that. So what we do, the first thing we do is teach them their fine motor skills. We strengthen their fine motor skills. So the next thing we do is give them an appropriately sized vehicle to write with, right? And then we let them start with, the wide circles or whatever. That's a really important thing for educators to understand.
Yes. Instead of coming up with devices to have the child mimic the pencil holding. Right. And they're like 2 years old.
Right.
And I'm like, oh, okay, well, if you just create that strength.
Right.
And let the child develop on their own, they're not going to use that little gimmick of making them hold that pencil.
Right, exactly. Well, we have a lot more to talk about in that area, but let's go for another little break.
Sounds great.
So welcome back. Let's continue our discussion about play in classrooms and the idea of how important play is. One of the things that I really want to stress that I think is really important is that really we talk about learning through play, but we're also as teachers able to assess through play in a much better way, a much more natural way, or a much more effective way than by a standardized test, right? So what do I mean by that? So play allows educators to see how children think. It allows educators to see how children solve problems. It allows us to see how children communicate with each other. And it shows us whether they're able to regulate their emotions, right? If you can't regulate your emotions, that becomes clear immediately in a play activity, right?
Yes.
In a different way than sitting on a standardized test would do. Standardized test doesn't tell us anything about a child's emotions.
No.
Doesn't tell us anything about how the child thought. How did they come to that answer, right? So if you know 2 + 2 = 4 and you put that as a mark on the standardized test, how do I know you really understand that concept?
Yes.
And I'm going to give you an example. When I was a child, I won a contest for multiplication tables, right? I was a great memorizer. I was into theater. I was a great memorizer. And I memorized the times tables and I got an award, right? I never understood what the times tables meant until I was in college. When I was in college, I had a teacher who was teaching math for educators, and he did a hands-on kind of activity where he took 2 × 2 and he counted it out and showed us a little graph, and I was like ding ding ding, bells went on. I finally understood what 2 × 5 meant, or 2 × 10 meant, or whatever, right? If somebody had done that in a play-based way with me early on,
you would have had it.
I would have had it. I would have understood it. But I didn't. I went through all of my education, and I was not I wasn't a slouch in school. I was a good student. But I never was good at math. I never understood it. I hated it because I didn't think it had any relation to me, because I couldn't comprehend that very simple fact of what is multiplication. Mm-hmm. So that's something that we have to really understand. And one of the things that we'll continue to talk about is that standardized testing doesn't test a lot of the things that we need to know about children to help them be successful. Mm-hmm. And we get that in a play-based assessment. We get that in a more natural assessment, right, than testing.
I agree. School-age children have to memorize times tables. So they came to me, hey, Miss Jeni, I don't understand. So I'm like, do you know what your multiplications are? They're like, yeah, we have to just memorize them. I said, it's adding. All of this is just another
fancy adding,
it's
right?
Fancy adding.
That's right.
And they looked at me and I'm like, really? And I'm like, yeah. So when they give you what's 4, times 2, you're just taking another 4 and you're adding it.
Right.
Now what's the answer? And they're like, 8.
Yeah.
And I'm like, you just add
Right.
it. And they're like, oh, but they're being told you just got to memorize it.
Right.
But memorizing is not going to give them the answer.
And they wanted the concept. They don't understand what it means.
Yeah, and they wanted to problem solve. I don't understand why I have to do that.
Right.
And how that, knowing that it's just adding,
right,
made it so much easier for them to say okay, now I understand it when I'm having to do my homework.
Right. When we were teaching my grandson about money, last year he learned about money in school. We were teaching, we were trying to support that teaching. We actually gave him some money, coins, the different coins he was learning, and we took him to the grocery store. And then he had to figure out, right? He bought 3 or 4 things, and then he had to figure out what did that change look like. That's a real life experience.
Yes.
And we could understand immediately that he understood the value of the coins.
Yes.
Because he had, say something was 40 cents, he had to add up 4 dimes,
yes.
right? And got that. So it really does help that kind of assessment, right?
Yes.
So I, one of the things I just would like to, make sure that we get across is that our mission for this, it's simple. It really is a simple mission, but I think it's powerful. It's to support parents and educators in understanding how play nurtures development.
Yes.
All parts of development. Cognitive development for sure, but social emotional development, physical development, all those domains of development in ages 0 through 8. Beyond that as well, we're going to focus on 0 to 8 for our purposes, but we really, we know there's a lot of science, a lot of research that supports the idea that play really helps children develop.
Yes, I agree. For us to be able to really take each one and really put some focus in it and help understand it. Right. One of the things that I think that gets pushed to the wayside is social and emotional. No, they're just not socially ready to be playing, or
Right.
they just socially don't know how to interact. Well, what did we teach them?
Right.
How did we teach them?
Right.
You know?
Did we teach them?
Did we?
Do we think that? I mean, I'm always saying that social and emotional is a taught skill,
Yes.
right? We're not born knowing we're not supposed to sit on tables.
No.
We're not born knowing that. Our society tells us that, right?
Correct.
That's socialization, and then some kids learn that really fast.
Yes.
Some kids it takes a little bit longer, just like reading or walking or any of the other skills we learn in life, right?
And you always make the comment like you wouldn't, if a child didn't stand up and walk, you're not going to say, well, that child's not going to walk right now. Just go ahead and forget it and move on to the
Right,
next child.
right.
We sit there and we
Encourage,
and
right.
pop them up and
Yes.
and giving them all those woo-hoos.
Yes.
And be able to say like, okay, that's the next step.
Yeah, we don't say, "Oh, that one's not a walker."
No.
Never going to be a walker, right?
No, not today.
When they fall the first one
Yes.
or two times, absolutely. So, I really think that's important. And one of the things we're going to do going forward is we're going to present some research-informed conversations, right, and some practical examples that people can use to really understand this concept and to really push for it in a class,
Yes,
right? Or
I
push for it in their kids' schools, because we should be demanding play.
Yes.
We should not be passively or even thinking all that our kids should do is academics,
Yeah.
when I say that. We should be demanding that our kids play at least through 8.
Yeah.
And we should be really encouraging that. And so for future episodes, that's what we'll do. We'll talk honestly about that development and the learning and the pressure we all face as educators and parents to get our kids to be successful, to get our kids to Harvard and all of that,
Yes.
right? So we've come to the end of our first episode.
Wow, it's been wonderful.
It's been great, huh?
Yes.
Yeah. So we're so glad you were here and able to join us. We'd like to welcome you back. If you've ever wondered whether play really matters, this podcast is for you. If you felt pressure to push children fast, this podcast is for you. And if you believe childhood should be filled with wonder, exploration, and connection, then this podcast is for you. So we welcome you and encourage you to come back.
Yes, pass it on. Tell your friends. Like, comment, and subscribe. And get everybody involved so we can put play back where play needs to be.
Because play isn't extra, it's essential.